Hello again, my friends, and today, we'll actually be building and painting this Pegasus model kit from Pegasus Hobbies, as it comes in 1/72 with two tanks, and they are nicknamed Jaguar Rundi tanks. And of course, this should be a very simple and short, easy build. As you can see, that the sprues are probably the thickest sprues that you've ever seen in your entire modeling career, and literally just one piece of paper of just one simple instruction of just showing you a little diagram of how it all comes together. But sometimes something simple as this isn't always as simple. So I'll show you what mistakes I did and how you can follow suit and try not to make the same issues that I did, especially the ones that I created, because I'm such a genius. So of course, starting off with cutting off the sprues with my sprue cutter, very cheap by the way, not a very fancy, expensive, probably $40 Tamiya sprue cutter, but it still gets the job done. Using now with fine cement, which is very nice and thin from Mr. Cement S, as I now try to begin to apply on the road wheels and the idler wheel, and of course, actually no, not the sprocket, because first I had an issue of trying to apply on the suspension, but I realized that I had it on the wrong way. So be sure to line it up into the right arm on the suspension wing, and making sure that the holes fit in nicely together. And of course, always remember to drill out your gun barrels, because if you don't, well, you're basically missing out on the easiest detail that you can do on any kind of model. Unless you don't have any kind of sharp hobby knife like as I do there, it doesn't even have to be a very expensive one. Just a good cheap one with a sharp tip should last you a good little while until the end of that tip breaks off. But here you can see that I, for some reason, couldn't figure out how to put on the turret, even while looking at the diagram. That it, finally took me maybe a good couple minutes to realize that the gun had to be fitted through, inside and out of the hole within the turret, and then I could place on the lower turret base. And just like that, you don't even need glue if you want to just snap it on. I just used the Mr. Cement S to fill in the gaps, and also any other little bits of unwanted texture, or already that this comes in a very nice little bits of detail and texture around the hole. But of course, you just don't want to have any random dust specks, for instance, from when you're drilling out holes of excess plastic dust. But surprisingly, this plastic isn't as soft or really as maybe strong as you may want to think. And to finally finish it off, we apply on the exhaust pipe, and I somehow managed to slice my thumb. Yay! So now we can finally find a good step into the painting process. So a good way to hold on to your models without touching them is using this Loctite blue tack, or whatever kind of poster putty that you can find that helps stick to the underside of your models. And a perfect way for priming this model is with some German red oxide primer, as they used in real life on their tanks. Keeping the spray can a good distance from the model and not trying to overflood it with too much paint, and losing all that nice little detail that this model actually surprisingly comes in a decent amount with. And I know I say decent twice there, because on the E25 kit that I did, that you may have seen me do previously, is actually not too bad as well. So thumbs up, Pegasus, on your kits. Now we're going to be using, of course, as you saw there, those four paints, the olive green, the buff, and of course eventually the white to help brighten the color. And as you can see that we want a nice, smooth, creamy consistency when you thinning down your paints. Always remember that. And of course, so you don't have to look at the uh, weird red background on the black paper, I just decided to make it into a nice, calm white background, just to help it make easier to spot on the model. And now I can just begin brush painting on black, gray, and buff. And of course, it can just be any white. I'm using cold white and buff mixed together just a little bit, just to help give us or bring out that nice random texture. Remember the overbrushing technique. We're not dry brushing here. If we were to be dry brushing, it would leave a dusty, not so great looking result. So a little bit of moisture within the brush, remove the excess, and just wick away on the model as you please. Just make sure to keep it random on certain areas to where we can eventually bring out that nice armor texture that we see on the model. And especially since I initially first wanted to make this into a speed paint video, but it's more or less the question of, should you speed paint your models or should you not? Especially if you're not a war gamer and you just want to pump out a good amount of models within a nice time frame. Especially since not too many of us have enough time to sit maybe 8 or 4 hours or maybe even more on our workbench. Especially since I know I definitely have more time than the average person who wants to work on their models. Especially since I'm still such a noob at doing this. But yeah, maybe a future video on properly showing you a step-by-step guide on how you can speed paint your models with efficiency and with some not so bad detail, especially with the overall result. Now, as you saw me there earlier, I was actually trying to show you how I could sort of wet blend on by wetting the surface with olive green and making it look like almost airbrushed, as it's very random and rushed. As if you were to look at historical photos, they are not perfect, which is what I'm going for, and it'll eventually be tied on all together in the end. Especially since I'm not too concerned about the overall result of the model, because that's why we have weathering with the brown sepia wash, which is like an orangish reddish brown, and the basic black wash, both from Game Wash Vallejo. And here you want to make sure that you could just slap it on randomly and just let it sit there, but you eventually find out that you don't want to let it have too much water, otherwise you get this weird iridescent purplish color finish, because it just doesn't look right. And you see, I tried to wet the surface first with a little bit of moistened water, and then try to make the wash into like a pin wash, as if we were to be working with oil washes or with enamels. But it kind of worked, but not really. If you want to do this, don't thin down the wash paints when you're mixing them together, and just pour them straight out of the bottle and don't add water. And when you have the surface wet, just use a small brush that you see there, and it should do the job good enough, maybe with the second layer. So now with the main highlights, and I really want to pump up that color contrast on the olive green tone on the dark yellow Jaguar Rundi you see here, as I want a nice little bit of interest, and since I love nice bright green colors on my models. And here I'm just doing a random stippling motion, again keeping it random, as of course our sort of airbrush effect, you might still be able to catch it on some areas like around the edges, but honestly not really what I was going for. But it still sort of represented maybe it was airbrushed, at least on the feathered edges that you see there. as it's, it's on purpose imperfections. But also, I'm just trying to uh, speed up my efficiency on how I can get these models done into a good, decent looking finish. As I told you earlier, that the very strange sort of purplish, dry, dark brown stains that were caused by the wash are very obvious and present on the model. And yeah, it just doesn't look good. So I eventually had to go back and apply on dark brown paint, sort of relatively thin down. And then, as you can see here, I didn't want this model to be that heavily weathered, and I really just tried to decide to figure out if I wanted it that heavily, chipped, as you can see here on this one. And I ended up just going back and repainting some of those areas with the black gray and the olive green. And here I'm just doing a very quick, easy chipping sponge effect that is so simple that even such as a nub as myself can easily do it with quick succession, and not even that great with hand brush chipping. And I'm trying to apply on scratches and maybe even larger chips, and eventually bring out that nice sort of mottled texture that you see above the side skirts, which I'm assuming they're side skirts because they're very flat and don't really offer that much texture from when I looked at the model. And now for something I really actually liked on the model is the red oxide primer chipping. Now, you could actually apply your own chipping, because since the Tamiya red oxide primer is actually quite thick and strong, and of course it is lacquer based, so it'll hold a lot better than these Vallejo paints. So really, if you wanted to, you keep the scratches minimal and not go all crazy like I have on this one, you could just use a toothpick, and it would be very nice, easy, and simple if you don't want your model to be, battered up, and it looks like it has seen a lot of service, as especially with mine. Here you see me using the sepia wash, wetting the surface, giving us more time to work with the very fast, quick drying acrylic wash, and then also mixing in a little bit of black wash to give us those nice, dark, grimy stains and leaks that I would assume would be appearing off from those side skirts. And a nice great way, I've shown this before on the spotter walker, using the khaki and sky gray color, maybe even with a little bit of white, depending on if you want your dust to be lighter, mixing them together equally, or maybe a little bit more khaki to help us give us that nice dusty look, especially since we'll tone it down eventually on the tracks and as well as on the side skirts with our sepia wash. For the tracks on the dark yellow Jaguar or Jaguar Rundi, I used a dry brush technique on the outer tracks, as they don't offer as much detail, and then just polish them with a graphite pencil. And here I'm just using a larger one from an artist shop, and it does the job very well, and just getting those nice big track cleats that you see there. And also for those weld beads and just those very prominent textures that you see there on some the welding connectors on the tanks, we just use nice bright silver, which, or you could just use the same technique that you saw me use on the tracks, but I like the nice gleaming shine on these, especially since it will be toned down with our black wash and maybe even with some weathering. Especially since it's very bright and prominent, I wanted to try this as I've never really done it on any of my models before, and I wanted to at least see what it looked like on the dark gray tank, and really I don't think it came out that badly. Unless I probably could have just used the black brown chipping and then just cover it over with the graphite pencil, but I I think I've done that plenty of times before, and maybe I should have used the gunmetal Vallejo paint, which is a little bit darker than the silver. So now I use the speckling acrylic white putty, which is I think excellent, as you see there on the left track that I've already weathered with this putty and with a nice wet dark mud effect. And it's actually, in my opinion, doesn't look half bad, especially since it's very cheap and easy to get a hold of this. And it's actually you get a huge tub of the speckling stuff for a very good price, rather than just buying something in a very small little tub, which would probably end up costing you more. But that's just me, especially since I don't even own one. So who am I to say? But now for something I think some of you may have known. If you mix the two, ketchup and mustard colors, red and yellow, with a little bit of black, it's very simple to get your own mud effect. You don't need, or at least earth effect, to where you don't need specifically flat earth or some kind of specific brown. Just mix a little bit of each other together in equal parts, and you've just created your own flat earth. And of course, you can desaturate it with maybe some sky gray or with a neutral gray. And there, I just added on some more black because I want a nice, fresh, sort of dampened dark mud effect. But entirely, it'll be up to you and what you want on the model, either dusty, damp, or as I will be doing here, nice dark mud effects. I hope you all don't mind the very quick and simple paint jobs, especially on these little German tanks that came from Pegasus. As you know, their kits are known to be very simple and beginner friendly for anybody who is new to the hobby or maybe who are more intermediate. Maybe not to those who are more expert, masters of modeling. I'm sure they could do a lot more detail work with this one, but for me, I just like working with this one a little bit faster and maybe just get a nice, good looking result at the end. But thank you all so much, and I can't wait to have another video out very soon for you of something very small, and I'll see you all next time.